When you drink coffee in the morning, you're doing something that feels completely modern. You grind beans, pour hot water over them, and somehow expect a brown liquid to turn your half-dead brain back on. But coffee is not a modern invention. Its story begins much farther back, in the forests of East Africa, and then takes a very strange journey through medieval Yemen, religious communities, trade routes, and eventually the entire planet. The surprising part is this: ancient humans probably did not drink coffee at all. At least, not the way you mean it. The coffee plant itself is ancient. The beverage is not. The plant genus Coffea is native to Africa, and the species that eventually became the foundation of most of the world's coffee, Coffea arabica, originated in the highlands of Ethiopia and surrounding regions. Wild coffee still grows there today, hiding underneath forest canopies, producing little red fruits that look much more innocent than the caffeine contained inside them. And this is where the story gets interesting. Imagine you're living in the Ethiopian highlands centuries ago. You don't have a coffee machine. You don't have a grinder. You definitely don't have someone writing extra shot on a little paper cup. But you do have the coffee plant. People in the region learn to use coffee in different ways. The berries could be eaten, the leaves could be prepared as a drink, and the seeds could be processed in various ways. One traditional account even describes grinding coffee seeds and mixing them with animal fat as a compact source of energy. But here's the important distinction. These practices are not the same thing as having a morning cup of brewed coffee. And this distinction matters because coffee history gets wrapped in legends. You've probably heard the famous story of Kaldi, the Ethiopian goat herder. According to the legend, sometime around the 9th century, Kaldi noticed that his goats became unusually energetic after eating red coffee berries. Naturally, he investigated, because apparently goats were the original product testers. Kaldi supposedly tried the berries himself, discovered their stimulating effects, and brought them to monks at a nearby monastery. The monks supposedly disliked the berries, threw them into a fire, smelled the roasted seeds, crushed them, mixed them with water, and accidentally invented coffee. It's a fantastic story. It's also not something historians can treat as established fact. There is no solid evidence that Kaldi actually existed or that this was how coffee was invented. The story appears in much later accounts, so it works beautifully as folklore but poorly as a timestamp. So, if the goats didn't give us the answer, when did humans actually start drinking coffee? The safest answer is much later, around the 15th century. And the place we need to visit is Yemen. This is where coffee changes from an interesting African plant into an actual beverage culture. Coffee appears to have been brought from its African homeland across the Red Sea and cultivated in Yemen. Yemen's highlands were particularly suitable for growing coffee, and the crop eventually became deeply connected with the country's economy and culture. By the 1400s, coffee was being prepared as a drink in Yemen, particularly among Sufi Muslim communities. And honestly, this makes perfect sense. Imagine having religious duties that require you to stay awake late into the night. Your body says, "Please go to bed." Your responsibilities say, "Absolutely not." Then somebody discovers a bitter drink that helps you stay alert. Suddenly, coffee has found its first great audience. Sufi communities use coffee to help maintain alertness during nighttime prayers, and from there its use spread beyond religious settings into everyday social life. So the first real coffee revolution wasn't caused by cafes, corporations, or people posting pictures of their cappuccinos. It was helped along by people who desperately did not want to fall asleep during midnight prayers. And once people realized coffee could keep them awake, the idea was almost impossible to contain. By the end of the 15th century, coffee had spread through major centers of the Islamic world, including Mecca and Cairo. Yemen became an important center of cultivation and trade, and the port city of Mocha became so strongly associated with coffee that its name eventually became attached to coffee itself. This is also where something else happens. Coffee stops being just a drink. It becomes a social technology. People gather around it. They talk. They argue. They exchange news. They play games. They discuss politics. They sit around doing the medieval equivalent of opening 17 tabs and forgetting why they opened any of them. Coffee houses began appearing across the Middle East and became important social spaces. The drink created a reason for people to stay together, talk, and exchange information. And that's one of the most fascinating things about coffee. The caffeine matters, but the ritual matters too. Humans have always turned useful substances into social experiences. You don't just drink coffee. You wake up. You prepare it. You smell it. You sit down. You work. You meet someone. You talk. The drink becomes attached to a whole sequence of behaviors. And once that happens, removing it becomes surprisingly difficult. But coffee wasn't done traveling. From Yemen and the wider Islamic world, coffee eventually moved toward Europe. European travelers encountered coffee in the Middle East and North Africa, and by the 17th century, coffee had begun establishing itself in European cities. London became one of the places where coffee culture really exploded. Coffee houses became gathering places for merchants, writers, intellectuals, and businessmen. They weren't just places to get caffeine. They became places where information moved. And that was a powerful combination. Imagine a room full of people. One person knows what's happening in the shipping industry. Another knows what's happening in politics. Someone else has heard about a new business opportunity. And everyone has a cup of coffee. Suddenly, the coffee house becomes a kind of human information network. No Wi-Fi. No smartphones. Just caffeine, gossip, and people who apparently had several hours available for conversation. By the middle of the 17th century, coffee was being sold in London coffee houses, and European coffee culture continued expanding from there. But there's an even bigger twist. The coffee you're drinking today doesn't come directly from some untouched ancient tradition. Modern coffee is the result of centuries of cultivation, trade, selection, roasting, transportation, technology, and cultural adaptation. The wild plant began in Africa. It was cultivated commercially in Yemen. It spread throughout the Islamic world. Then it traveled into Europe. Then European colonial powers transported coffee cultivation into tropical regions across the world. And eventually, places such as Brazil, Colombia, Indonesia, Vietnam, and many others became major coffee-producing regions. The little red fruit that evolved in African forests had become a global commodity. And somehow, humanity's final achievement was putting it in a paper cup and charging you $5 for it. But let's go back to the original question. When did ancient humans start drinking coffee? If by ancient humans you mean the people who lived tens of thousands of years ago, the answer is probably they didn't. Your Stone Age ancestors weren't waking up in a cave saying, "Give me a double espresso before I hunt this mammoth." Coffee plants existed long before modern coffee culture, but the evidence for coffee as a brewed beverage points to the medieval period, particularly Yemen in the 15th century. That's an enormous difference. The first farmers, the builders of ancient cities, the Egyptians, the Greeks, the Romans, the people who painted cave walls tens of thousands of years ago. They lived without coffee, and somehow they survived, which means something important about your morning ritual. You don't actually need coffee to be human. You need it because humans are extremely good at taking something useful, turning it into a habit, turning the habit into a ritual, and then convincing ourselves the ritual has always existed. Coffee is a perfect example. It began as a plant. Then someone discovered ways to use it. Someone else turned it into a drink. Someone else realized it could keep people awake. Someone else sold it. Someone else built a cafe around it. Someone else added milk. Someone else invented espresso. And eventually you ended up standing in a kitchen at 7:03 in the morning, staring at a machine like it's responsible for your entire personality. That's the strange history of coffee. It isn't really the story of one invention. It's the story of thousands of tiny human decisions accumulating over centuries. A plant becomes food. Food becomes a drink. A drink becomes a ritual. A ritual becomes a culture. And a culture becomes something you barely question. So tomorrow morning, make your coffee. Smell it. Drink it. But remember where the story begins. Not in a cafe. Not in a modern kitchen. And probably not with a magical goat named Kaldi. It begins with a wild plant growing in the forests of East Africa, and with humans slowly discovering that this strange little fruit could change how awake they felt. Look past the cup. Question the habit. Trace it back. You're not just drinking coffee. You're participating in a human tradition that took centuries to become your morning routine.